Welcome back to ShareTreck, everyone. Jack here with the amazing Diane.
Always a pleasure to be back.
Today, we're taking a look at Grail, an investor's perspective on their recent Evercore presentation, trying to see what we could find out about their future, what clues there might be, and what it could mean for your portfolio.
Yeah, Grail and their focus on multi-cancer early detection, or MCED as it's known, it's a really hot topic right now. I mean, huge potential, but, also some big challenges. So this presentation really gave us, I think, some valuable insights.
Definitely valuable.
Yeah.
So we're going to try to break it down for everyone out there, their progress, the strategy, and of course, we've got to look at the financials.
Of course.
We'll highlight what's most interesting, for potential investors. Think of it as like a shortcut to understanding Grail's pitch.
Yeah, and before we even get into the specifics, I think it's important to understand just how big of a problem Grail is actually trying to solve here. Cancer is a global issue, millions of new cases and deaths every year. And the key to better outcomes is early detection, something that we're honestly not very good at right now.
You're right about that. For a lot of these really deadly cancers, we don't even have any routine screenings.
Right.
And even when we do, they miss most cases.
Yeah.
It's a pretty sobering thought. But it does set the stage for why Grail believes that they have, such a compelling solution.
Yeah, they're really betting big on this MCED being the answer. A single blood test that could detect dozens of cancers at their earliest stages, which of course would allow for much more effective treatment.
Right.
I mean, if it works, as they say, it could really revolutionize how we approach cancer care.
It's a bold vision.
Yeah.
So let's rewind a little bit. How did Grail get here?
Yeah, so they actually started back in 2015. They spun out from Illumina, which a lot of investors will recognize from their work on non-invasive prenatal testing, or NIPT as it's known.
Right.
And that connection is important because NIPT also relies on DNA analysis. So Grail is building on Illumina's, expertise in this area. And their progress has been pretty remarkable. They've launched Gallery, which is their MCED test, built up significant lab capacity, and they've even run large-scale studies already.
They've also secured FDA breakthrough device designation for Gallery and partnered with the UK's National Health Service, the NHS.
Right.
Those are some pretty serious credibility points.
Absolutely. Especially that NHS partnership that could be huge. I mean, we're talking about a potential nationwide rollout, making the UK the first country to actually embrace MCED on such a massive scale. It's a strong signal to the rest of the world.
So let's zoom in on Gallery itself. It's a simple blood test,
Yeah.
but what makes it so special?
Well, for starters, it's got a really low false positive rate, only 0.5%, so very few false alarms, which is, really crucial for a screening test.
Right. You don't want to unnecessarily worry people.
Exactly. And it doesn't just flag a potential cancer signal. It actually tries to predict where the cancer is coming from. This is key because then it guides doctors, where to focus further diagnostics. So you avoid a lot of wasted time and anxiety for patients.
Makes sense.
The FDA actually emphasized how important that origin prediction was when they granted Gallery the breakthrough device designation. It's not just about detecting cancer, it's about guiding those next steps in a way that's clinically meaningful.
Grail is clearly not shy about their ambitions. They're targeting a pretty wide range of stakeholders, from individual doctors to entire healthcare systems, employers, even life insurance companies.
What's really interesting is that they're already seeing a good amount of adoption for Gallery, even before there's widespread reimbursement in place. That says something about the demand for this kind of technology.
And that NHS partnership we were talking about, that could really supercharge their growth. Imagine the impact of having MCED integrated into a national healthcare system. It would be a game changer for Grail and for the fight against cancer.
No question. And they're putting their money where their mouth is,
Yeah.
They've invested a lot in scaling up their operations, making sure they can handle the increase in demand as MCD starts to gain traction.
So they've got the technology, the ambition, and the infrastructure. But what about the financials? Are they as solid as the rest of their story?
Well, let's dive into the numbers and find out.
Because at the end of the day, that's what matters most to investors.
Exactly. We'll see if the financials match the hype.
Yeah, the financials definitely tell an interesting story. In fiscal year 2023, Grail brought in $93 million in revenue, and that growth continued strong into the first quarter of 2024. And they're projecting, this upward trend to keep going, with operating losses shrinking as they gain scale.
Okay, so they're not just burning through cash. They're actually starting to generate some meaningful revenue. That's encouraging.
Right. And what's even better is they see a path to profitability once they can secure broader reimbursement. That's a key hurdle for any diagnostic company, especially in a new market like MCED.
But if they can convince insurers and government programs to cover Gallery, the revenue could really take off.
Right. The floodgates could open. So they've also got a pretty healthy cash cushion, about $1 billion, which they say is enough to fund them through some major milestones like that FDA approval everyone's waiting for and the completion of that NHS study.
Right.
So financially, they seem to be in a pretty good position to, weather the storm while they wait for those catalysts to play out.
Yeah, but here's where it gets really interesting. Grail doesn't just see MCED as a one-trick pony. They're thinking much bigger, envisioning a future where Gallery isn't just for asymptomatic screening.
Okay, now you've got my attention. What else are they cooking up?
Well, they're exploring using it in symptomatic patients, too. So imagine someone has symptoms, but, traditional tests can't figure out what's causing them. Gallery could potentially give a much faster, more definitive diagnosis guide treatment and maybe even avoid unnecessary procedures.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like having a shortcut to the answer, saving time, and reducing anxiety for patients.
Exactly. And don't forget about their methylation platform. This underlying technology isn't just for detecting cancer. It could be used in precision oncology as well. Things like monitoring how someone's responding to treatment or catching cancer recurrence early.
So they're not just a testing company. They're building a platform that could impact all different aspects of cancer care. That's a powerful vision and one that investors are clearly excited about.
Yeah, but of course it's not all smooth sailing. There are definitely challenges ahead, and investors need to be aware of those too.
Of course. What are some of those potential roadblocks they might encounter?
Well, one of the biggest is securing that reimbursement from insurance companies and government healthcare programs that we were talking about earlier. I mean, it's absolutely critical for widespread adoption, but it's a really complicated and often lengthy process.
Yeah.
And Grail did say in their presentation that they're actively working with payers and policymakers to try and make the case for MCED coverage. But it's far from a done deal.
They're also supporting legislation that would allow Medicare to cover MCED tests. That would be a huge win if they can get it through because Medicare covers so many people,
Yeah,
which is a population with a high incidence of cancer.
absolutely. But even with all those efforts, reimbursement is still a big question mark.
Mm.
And then there's that FDA approval process.
Yeah.
We know they've submitted a rolling application for Gallery, but it's going to take a while.
Yeah, the final decision isn't expected until 2026. That's a long wait.
It is. But on the other hand, it does give Grail more time to gather data and refine their strategy.
So,
And if they do get that FDA approval, it's a major validation of their technology, which could quiet some of the critics.
yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
But let's not forget about the competition. There are other companies out there working on MCED tests, so Grail can't just sit back and relax. This is a race, and there are other strong contenders.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I heard it.
True. But from what we saw in this presentation, Grail seems to have a pretty good head start in terms of data and commercialization. I mean, they're already making money and building these partnerships while some of their competitors are still in the early stages.
Right. They've also got the backing of some really serious investors. They raised billions in funding before going public, and they've got a strong management team with a lot of experience in biotech. Those are valuable assets in a game like this.
Absolutely. But even with all that going for them, there are still risks that investors need to think about. Like any emerging technology, there's always a chance that MCED won't live up to the hype.
Meaning it might not be as effective as early studies have shown, or it could be more expensive or difficult to implement than we expect.
Exactly. There's also the risk that regulators could be slow to approve these tests, or that payers might drag their feet on coverage, even if the FDA gives the green light. And even if MCED takes off, there's no guarantee that Grail will be the one on top. The competition could catch up, or a new technology could come along and change everything.
Those were all good points.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, there's always the risk of things we just don't see coming. Manufacturing issues, unexpected side effects lawsuits. Investing in these new technologies is always risky, but the potential payoff can be huge. It's all about balancing those risks and rewards.
And that's why it's so important to do your own research. Don't just take our word for it. Read up on Grail, look at their financials, understand their technology, and talk to your financial advisor. Make an informed decision based on your own risk tolerance and investment goals.
Very wise words.
Yeah.
We're here to give you insights and analysis, but the decision of whether or not to invest in Grail is ultimately up to you. And there's one more aspect of Grail's Evercore presentation that I think deserves a closer look.
I'm all ears.
It's their focus on data. Grail is building this massive amount of information that could be really valuable in the long run. I mean, they're not just developing a test, they're building a knowledge base.
Yeah, that's a great point. I talked a lot about their clinical evidence program, those big studies like Pathfinder and the NHS Gallery trial. I mean, those studies are generating tons of data on how Gallery actually performs in the real world.
Right. And they even mentioned a new study, RECH, which is specifically focused on Medicare beneficiaries.
Oh, wow.
That's a smart move because that's a huge population with a high rate of cancer.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that it's not just about proving that Gallery works. It's about really understanding how it works in different groups of people, how it affects healthcare decisions, and ultimately how it can improve outcomes for patients. I mean, this data is going to be essential for refining Gallery, developing new products, and making a much stronger case for reimbursement.
And they're not just collecting data from those clinical trials. They've got this whole real-world evidence program where they're tracking how Gallery is being used commercially, getting feedback from doctors and patients. It's like they're building this giant feedback loop to constantly improve and innovate.
It's almost like they're creating a map of cancer using all this data to track it and find new ways to stop it.
That's a great analogy. And that's really what sets Grail apart from a lot of other biotech companies, this data-driven approach. In a world that's becoming more and more data-driven, Grail is really setting themselves up to be a leader. They're not just selling tests, they're building a platform for understanding cancer in ways that we never even thought possible.
So what does all of this mean for potential investors? Well, I think it shows that Grail is thinking long term. They're investing in the future, not just trying to make a quick profit.
Right. They're building a company that could be around for decades, not just riding the wave of some new market. That's the kind of company I'd be interested in.
Yeah, me too. Definitely not without risks, but the potential rewards are huge. I mean, Grail is tackling one of the biggest challenges in healthcare, and they're doing it with this data-driven strategy that could really revolutionize the field.
So there you have it. That's our take on Grail's Evercore presentation. We think it paints a pretty interesting picture for potential investors.
But as always, remember, this is just our analysis, not financial advice. Do your own research before you make any investment decisions.
Absolutely. If you found this insight helpful, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It really helps the channel grow. Thanks for tuning in to ShareTreck with Jack and Diane. We'll see you next time.